In the early hours of Valentine's Day 1981, 841 young people were dancing in a converted factory on the north side of Dublin. Most of them were teenagers. By 2 a.m, 48 of them were dead, and the exits they ran for were wrapped in chains. The government's inquiry blamed the victims. It took the families 43 years to force the state to say the truth out loud, that their children were unlawfully killed. This is the story of the Stardust, the fire, the chains, and the longest fight for justice in Irish history. Artane, North Dublin. The Stardust was one of the biggest ballrooms in Ireland, a nightclub built inside the shell of an old food processing factory. On the night of the 13th of February 1981, it was hosting a Valentine's disco and a dance competition. Entry was free before 10:30, and the hall filled with more than 800 people, most of them from the surrounding neighborhoods. Half of them were 18 or younger. The building they were dancing in had been assembled with a series of quiet compromises. The walls of the ballroom were covered in carpet tiles, not fire-rated wall covering, but ordinary floor carpet bought as a discontinued job lot. The company that sold them would later tell investigators they would never have recommended those tiles for walls under any circumstances. The city's chief fire officer had specified Class 1 fire-rated materials. The tiles were Class 3 and Class 4. The seats were polyurethane foam wrapped in PVC. The windows of the toilets, the only other way out, had been fitted with metal grills, and some with steel plates welded on without permission. And then there were the exits. 6 emergency exits. On paper, more than enough for 800 people. 3 weeks before the fire, the city council had written to the owners, demanding an assurance that every exit would be kept unobstructed at all times. The manager wrote back, "I assure you, all exits will be kept clear." The chains stayed on. Why would anyone chain the fire exits of a packed nightclub? The answer was money. If the exits were open, people could slip in without paying, and friends inside could open a door for friends outside. The management's solution was simple. On disco nights, the exits stayed locked or chained until late in the evening, and some were mock-locked. A padlocked chain draped over the panic bars, so that from the inside, in a hurry, in the dark, you could not tell whether the door would open at all. The manager himself described the policy in his own statement to police. The last exits, he said, were normally opened between 11:30 and midnight. The policy, he said, was forced on him by the number of people getting in for free. There was another reason the doors stayed locked. At the inquest, decades later, evidence emerged of a scam run by some of the door staff, letting people in through a side entrance for cash below the ticket price. Locked exits kept the scam invisible. So on Valentine's night 1981, with 841 people inside, exit 6 had been nailed shut for weeks. Exit 5 was chained with a padlock behind a stack of bottle crates. Exit 3 was chained and padlocked. Exit 4 had a chain looped over the bar. This was the building at 20 minutes to 2 when a doorman noticed smoke in a closed-off corner of the ballroom. The fire began quietly, behind the walls, an electrical fault in a storage cupboard beside the main bar. It smoldered unseen, then broke into a partitioned-off seating alcove at the west end of the hall. At first, it was 2 seats burning. Witnesses stood and watched it. The resident DJ saw it and thought it would be out in 15 seconds. Then the fire touched the walls. The carpet tiles caught and everything changed. Flame raced up and across the walls, and the burning tiles began to rain molten, flaming droplets onto the seats below. Each droplet lit another seat. The PVC in the foam poured out carbon monoxide, hydrogen cyanide, and hydrogen chloride, a gas that sears the lungs. Under that low ceiling, the heat concentrated until the remaining seats did not catch fire. They simply exploded into flame all at once. Fire scientists call it flashover. From 2 seats burning to a hall full of fire took only a few minutes. Witnesses described flames flying across the ceiling. Then the lights failed. 800 people, in total darkness, in poison smoke, ran for the exits. At exit 3, a young man found the chain and held the padlock in his hand. At exit 4, a group pushed and pulled at the doors and could not move them. At exit 5, a bouncer spent 3 minutes kicking a padlock off. At the main entrance, survivors testified the doors were closed for 5 minutes with people still inside, screaming. One survivor, 18 years old, crawled on her hands and knees to the toilets and put her head inside the bowl, just to find air. Firemen arriving 8 minutes later tried to tear the steel bars off the toilet windows with chains hooked to the fire engine. The bars did not move. 48 people never came out. Half of the dead were found between exits 3 and 5, at the doors that did not open. 2 of them were found with their arms around each other. The dead were between 16 and 27 years old. One was pregnant. One young couple left behind a 17-month-old baby. In 23 families, the person who died was the eldest child and the family's only wage earner. The Keegan family lost 2 daughters at once, Mary, 19, and Martina, 16. Their sister Antoinette survived on life support with a collapsed lung. Martina's boyfriend made it out and died going back in for her. Within days, the government convened a tribunal. It sat for 122 days, and much of what it found was damning, recklessly dangerous practices, locked exits, untrained staff, a building full of the wrong materials. But on the question of how the fire started, the tribunal did something extraordinary. It admitted there was no evidence of arson, and then declared that arson was, nonetheless, the probable cause. On no evidence at all, the blame was moved on to the young people in the hall. That single sentence did 2 things. It legally shielded the owners, who then claimed compensation from the state for malicious damage and received more than £500,000. The families of the dead received a maximum of £7,500 per child, and it branded the victims. For decades, the official record of Ireland said the young people of the Stardust had probably burned themselves. No one was ever prosecuted. The father of the Keegan sisters founded a victims committee in 1985. He died the following year. On the same day, he lost his final court case. His wife and daughter carried the campaign on. It took 28 years to remove the lie. In 2009, the Irish Parliament formally struck the arson finding from the public record, acknowledging what the families had said from the beginning: no one in that hall was to blame. But removing a lie is not the same as telling the truth. The families wanted the deaths themselves examined again. They petitioned, marched, and filed. In 2019, 38 years after the fire, the Attorney General ordered fresh inquests. They became the longest inquests in the history of the Irish state. 95 days of evidence, more than 370 witnesses, survivors in their 60s describing the night they crawled through the dark at 18. On the 18th of April 2024, the jury returned its verdict for all 48 unlawful killing. The fire had started in an electrical cupboard. The carpet tiles had spreaded. The exits had been locked, chained, or obstructed. and the people inside had been impeded from escaping. 43 years after the fire, the state finally said it plainly. 5 days later, the Taoiseach stood in Parliament and apologized. "We failed you when you needed us most." Every person there was innocent. By then, many of the parents had not lived to hear it. The rules changed long before the apology came. Within 10 months of the fire, Ireland passed the Fire Services Act of 1981, the foundation of modern Irish fire law. A legal duty of care on everyone who controls a building full of people. Fire authorities with the power to shut dangerous premises. And regulations, written in the Stardust's shadow, that say a fire exit must be unobstructed, unlocked, and openable. Always. Every unchained fire door in Ireland is that verdict, written into law. The safety rules are written in blood. And it is usually blood that somebody was warned about first. If you want the next story, subscribe to them all, and I'll see you there.